Hi there. This is A Little Louder, a podcast for wonks, housers, and rabble-rousers where we talk about fair housing, community development, and how we can use these issues to build people power and work toward equity and justice. I'm Michael Deepland. Today's short version of our podcast is a buzz session where we talk about current issues facing Texas affordable homes and neighborhoods. And today we're joined by Research Director Ben Martin to talk about the QAP in 2023 and how a bulk of affordable housing is shaped by a precious few and how we can change that. Welcome to the show, Ben.
Happy to be here.
So before we get started, I think we should talk about what the QAP is. Now, we've talked about the QAP before all the way back in October of 2020 in episode 30. But Ben, I just want to give you a little bit of time just to give a brief explanation of what the QAP is.
Yeah. And we have to even take a step back from that. Before we talk about what the QAP is, we have to talk about what low-income housing tax credits are, sometimes referred to in Texas as tax credit housing or the housing tax credit. This is a federal program managed by the IRS, and we're not going to go into a ton of detail today, but what you need to know is that the low-income housing tax credit program, or LIHTC, is responsible for creating more low-income affordable rental units than any other source of federal funding. There are tens of millions of dollars that are allocated that eventually make development possible that wouldn't have been possible otherwise, specifically for properties for low-income renters. And then the QAP that's the abbreviation. It stands for Qualified Allocation Plan. This is a state level plan that our state housing agency, TDHCA, the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, this is their plan, and it basically guides where development is. So the QAP lays out rules for eligibility for the types of projects that can be proposed and points scoring system that different developments are scored by. And this determines which of these projects are successfully awarded these housing tax credits. And this is really, really important, right? Because this guides what type of affordable housing is built, which types of neighborhoods these units are built in, whether they're high quality neighborhoods that are close to opportunity or whether they aren't, and who gets to live there, like what level of affordability these units are at. Are they, units that are available for people making 60% AMI, or are they deeply affordable units for people making 30% area median income AMI? Are they for special populations like families or seniors, or people who are exiting homelessness and maybe need wraparound support services, that sort of thing. So the QAP is really, really important in determining where the largest number of low-income units that are produced every year, where they go in the state of Texas.
Well, thank you for that 2-minute explanation on something people spend their entire year working on. And we're going to try to spend just a couple minutes here talking about what we have to look forward to in the 2023 QAP. So can you talk a little bit about what's different this year and what we have to look forward to in this sort of like scoring criteria and just what Texas Housers is trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so this year, TDHCA, our state housing department, announced that they would have additional opportunities for public participation around the annual update to changes to the QAP. And again, these are changes that determine what properties are proposed and what properties are ultimately successful in being built. And so Texas Housers has been involved in those conversations and in that process throughout the spring of 2022. Right now, we're at the point where the draft QAP has been released, and there's another opportunity for engagement that we'll talk about here on this call. But a really important thing to talk about in this public participation and conversation around the QAP is that these conversations are absolutely dominated by developer voices. These developers have the money, the expertise, the time to go in, and the incentive to go in and participate in these meetings, because their participation in getting the QAP to align with their development needs could be the difference of them having a successful development or not. It's really important to remember, though, that although sometimes they align, not always do developer needs and interests align exactly with those of the low income tenants who desperately need these units and this opportunity to live in affordable housing. So there's an absence at the table, a notable absence of low income tenants themselves, both ones currently living at tax credit properties and those who would like to live at tax credit properties and be eligible to live there. So one important thing that I think we really need to wrestle with in the state of Texas is how do we provide more opportunities? How does the housing department, housing agency, how do they provide more opportunities for low income tenants themselves to participate and have a say in how these units are developed?
Mm. And is there a way that we can try to push that level of engagement for the tenants who are living in this housing, or for just everyday people who want to get involved and have a say, rather than just the developers who sometimes our interests align, but sometimes they may not? Like, what is the sort of the remedy to fix that gap in engagement?
Well, I think one opportunity, one consistent opportunity to have your voice heard by TDHCA is to go to their monthly board meetings and speak there. Unfortunately, there is not a virtual option to do that. So you have to go in person in Austin to go and have the board hear what you have to say. Providing a virtual opportunity for engagement would really go a long way. There's also opportunity for TDHCA staff to prioritize more engagement and involvement, surveying, conversations with tax credit residents. And right now, in the short term, there is a very clear opportunity to have your voice heard on this new draft QAP. It is out now for public comment, and you can submit your own written comments by email to TDHCA by 5 p.m. on October 14th. And those comments will be taken into consideration for the final changes to the upcoming rules that guide where this housing is placed. And we have details and our brand new report on our website, texashousers.org. The report is called How to Make the 2023 Tax Credit Housing QAP Work Better for Low Income Tenants. And in that report, we outline a number of the main topics that are up for debate this year in this year's QAP discussions. We provide a lot of policy and research background on what the evidence says and what policy best practices from across the nation are on these topics. And we make recommendations for the changes and the approaches that we believe that TDHCA should take. So if you're looking for a little bit of guidance on how to approach your comments, the report at texashousers.org would be a great place to start.
Okay, well, let's just dive right into the report. So, what are some of the things that we should be looking at when it comes to the QAP this year? What are some of the big topics to tackle? And what is some of the research that you and some of the researchers here at Texas Housers, what are some of the things that they found?
Yeah, so this is a very complex and technical document. It can be a little intimidating to dive into, but at a high level, we want to talk about maybe like 5 or 6, kind of a half dozen themes that came up over and over again at these meetings and that are sort of on the table for possible change this year. And you can check out that report. We go into a lot of detail on these. But right now, there's an issue around making sure that costs per unit are contained. The topic is called cost containment, or just maximizing the number of affordable units that are produced per tax credit. And so basically what's going on is building costs for developers have gone up a lot due to inflation and other factors in the last year or 2 years. So at a simple level, there's a risk that we're getting less bang for our buck, less units per tax credit spent. And so because we know that these proposals are competitive, not everybody who applies gets one, there's a real opportunity here to then, if 2 proposals score the same, which happens very often, how are we prioritizing which of those tied score projects is getting the tax credits. And so we propose one approach to a tiebreaker would be kind of having a scale that promotes more low income units and deeper affordability. It's a rubric where you get points for the number of units you have, but if those units are deeply affordable, at 50% AMI or even 30% AMI, you get even more points for those units.
Are ties common
Ties are
when it
extremely,
comes to this?
extremely common. Developers are looking at the QAP and attempting to maximize the number of points that they can get. And so it is not uncommon in a region of Texas for many properties to score at or around the same score. And so these tiebreakers are very important.
Hmm, I see. What are some of the other things you're seeing?
Yeah, so there's been a conversation, and we're watching this, it's sort of evolving, but there's been a conversation around whether we should start changing the rules around if you're allowed to build new projects close to existing projects, or whether you're allowed to build two new projects in close proximity to each other in the same year. Typically, the scoring system has and regulations guiding tax credit housing have tried to spread it out and to get more housing built in places where it hasn't been built before. But there's a lot of dynamics at play here, and there are some potentially valid reasons why we might start to consider allowing for multiple developments to exist close to each other. However, what we want to avoid is a situation like what happened a long time ago where a lot of tax credit housing was built in low income, high poverty, low opportunity areas and was kind of clustering there. And none of it was really happening in higher opportunity areas. And so that was actually leading to tax credit housing concentrating poverty, concentrating racial and income segregation. One of the things that tax credit housing should be doing is reducing segregation by race, by income, by ethnicity. And so we believe that if the rules are revised to allow for multiple properties to be developed in the same place, that this should be an exception only for high opportunity areas. We want more tax credit housing in places that are going to give low income tenants a lot of proximity to jobs, proximity to transit, and other amenities that are going to help them, their kids, their families. A couple other things. There are opportunities to improve the incentivization of supportive housing for people exiting homelessness and others who need wraparound social services. There have been a couple proposals on the table this year around this, and we do believe that priority isn't just directly given to supportive housing development proposals. Then TDHCA needs to have a really strong plan going into the next couple of years on how they're going to incentivize supportive housing. We know that this is more difficult to develop and manage, and so whoever's doing it needs to provide this vital resource for low-income people that have struggled or dealing with homelessness or other issues where they need social services. And then there's this other issue that's kind of tied into this main theme we were talking about how tenant voice isn't as prioritized as it needs to be in this entire process. There's been some conversation about which on-site amenities need to be prioritized or could be given points for, and some changes to them. But there's not really a lot of information on what on-site amenities tenants themselves are looking for, use, or prioritize. And there's a real opportunity on this topic and really on all of these topics to ask tenants themselves, what is it that you use? Is it Amazon lockers? Is it a pool? Is it bike infrastructure? What are the amenities that you're using and that you would prioritize on site, which just gets to this like larger theme of making sure that tenants are heard in this process and that TDHCA has a way of including the voices of current and potential tenants in decision making around these changes and not just developers.
So it seems like, we've worked through a lot of what we can recommend through the process of the QAP and our comments. But, imagine that you had more power, that you sort of had the pen to really rewrite this thing. What do you think that you would change if it were possible, outside of the scope of what we're already doing?
Might be a little irresponsible of TDHCA in the state of Texas to give me the keys to the kingdom here. But I want to just reiterate again that one area that I think we need to see is increased opportunity for low income tenants to have a voice in decisions around tax credit housing in the state, and changes to the QAP and really the whole tax credit program. The idea that a tenant from El Paso or Lubbock would have to drive all the way to Austin to have their voice heard in TDHCA board meetings is just really inappropriate and really minimizes the ability of tenants to be heard themselves in these proceedings. Providing virtual options, doing targeted outreach at TDHCA to hear from tenants on these issues is just as important. I would say more important, clearly, than developers. It's easy to forget, because this is such a technical topic, that the end user, the person who's supposed to be benefiting from the tax credit program, is not the developer. They're not the client here. The client is low income tenants. And we would all do well to remember that.
Yes, no, absolutely. Before we shift gears, I wanted to ask you, because Texas Housers is not in this fight alone. And I wanted to give you this opportunity to sort of refer to any of our partners who have been really working hard on QAP as well. I know that there's a few folks that you had in mind that you wanted to just give some space for. Is there anyone that you'd like to sort of point out? Of course, if we leave anybody out, this is not it's not personal.
Yeah, put me on the spot. I think a special shout out goes to some very active participants in the QAP discussions this year on the advocacy side. Texas Homeless Network and Disability Rights Texas have been very engaged partners in ensuring that the QAP changes are there to benefit low-income people and not just developers.
Well, thank you, Ben Martin, for joining us here on A Little Louder to talk a little bit about the QAP. And we will definitely keep up with you, and we will keep up with this process to see what can actually be created for affordable housing with regard to low-income households. But yeah, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. And I just want to plug one more time that folks listening can access the report that we just released on the tax credit housing QAP. It's called How to Make the 2023 Tax Credit Housing QAP Work Better for Low Income Tenants. You can find it at texashousers.org. And you can also find there all of the instructions and directions for how to submit your own comments to those changes to the QAP and the currently proposed QAP draft. Those comments need to be received by TDHCA by 5 p.m. on October 14th, so make your voice heard.
All right, great. Well, that'll do it for this episode of A Little Louder. See you later.